having a great day. My name is Jay, and you're watching Clouded Reactions. So we just got done listening to Long Live the King, which is track 10 off the Corollas Rex album. And man, can we just appreciate how well written the solos are in all these songs, man. That was probably one of the best solos I've heard so far. That solo guitar, just because it was just like, it changed up so many times. And it was only like, what, how long are the solos? 20 seconds? 15, 20 seconds? And yet it had so many different levels to it. Like it was going one direction, then it changed another. It would go high note, then kind of swerve down. I really enjoy their solos, and it's really amazing to me how well every single song is put together. So let's go ahead and listen to the history behind the song. I'm assuming they got to explain how, or the reasoning as to why people believe that Corollas Rex was actually assassinated, possibly by one of his own men. So shut up, Jay. Let's just hop right on in.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joaquin from Sabaton.
This is Sabaton History. Karl den Tofte, known popularly as Corollas Rex, was killed by a stray bullet in battle, like pretty much anyone else in war at that time. Who fired that bullet? Well, there's a lot of speculation about that.
And our song, Long Live the King, is about that day and his funeral march home.
The military disaster for Sweden that was the Battle of Poltava on June 28, 1709, was a crippling wound that put the whole future of Sweden in jeopardy. The Swedish king, Karl XII, had barely escaped being captured by the victorious Russians and was now having his wounds tended as a guest of the Ottoman Empire at the city of Bender in what is now Moldova. Although he was safe among the Ottomans, Russia's great enemy, he was now also over 700 miles away from his realm, halfway across Europe. That in itself was maybe more damaging to the Swedish Empire than any Poltava could have been. With the absence of their ruler, the Swedish parliament in Stockholm, the Riksdag, was in a precarious situation. The destruction of the Swedish army at Poltava had encouraged the old enemies of Sweden to renew hostilities. Not only the Russians, but Saxony and Denmark as well set their sights on the now struggling Swedish Baltic Empire. The Riksdag did its best to negotiate some sort of peace with its enemies to buy time for the king's return. Karl, however, forbade any further peace negotiations. He believed that he had once brought the empire glory and prestige, and he would do so once again in the future. He also was taking his own sweet time about returning to Sweden. Without a peace deal, Riga and Dunemunda were soon lost, as were Reval and other Swedish possessions and fortresses in the Baltic states. In November 1709, an army of 16,000 Danes crossed Öresund to attack Sweden itself. Sweden fortunately had on its side the highly capable Governor-General of Skåne, Magnus Stenbock, who not only put together an army of mostly young recruits for the defense of the Swedish homeland, but also used that army to counterattack and drive the Danes out of Sweden. But this could not go on forever. Many felt that Sweden needed a strong statesman, a level-headed sovereign, who could assess the nation's real strength and the limits of its power. But it was still an absolute monarchy by constitution, and whatever the Riksdag decided, their decisions could still be overruled weeks or months later as King Karl's orders finally arrived from his self-proclaimed exile. The situation was indeed dire. Sweden was bleeding dry. Its economy, which was mostly agrarian, was in shambles. The people were starving, carrying the burden of a besieged empire on their overtaxed backs. Famine, bankruptcy crippled the realm. Soldiers could not be raised because there was no equipment for them. Ships could not be repaired. Cannons could not be cast. There were mortgages on towns and estates, and even the church bells had to be sold just to keep the Swedish state and its defenses alive. Stenbock's victory brought them breathing room, though, and there was even a chance of a neutrality pact, backed by the Holy Roman Emperor, who wanted to prevent the war from spreading into his realms. The Riksdag supported the idea, but Karl would hear nothing of it. In fact, he hated the idea of a neutrality pact, thinking that this would ultimately tie his hands, keep him from reconquering the lands that were rightfully his. Sweden's future, he believed, was destined for greatness, and Karl would not be the king under whose rule the Baltic Empire fell. Putting his trust in God, and the righteousness of his cause, the king tore.
You know, there's nothing kills a leader or a king more than pride. It's good that he had this vision of Sweden and how great the potential it had, but sometimes you gotta back off and live to fight another day. If he would have just taken his time and went right back home, because apparently Sweden at home, they're doing really bad, a lot more terrible than I was under the assumption of. They're doing horrible, and yet he wouldn't allow these certain treaties to go by just because like I said, he didn't want his hands tied. He didn't want to get stuck into an agreement where he couldn't expand or, whatever. So it's good that he had the vision, but sometimes you just got to sit back and let things kind of run, let things play out, and then try again later. But you're trying to do too much on a very thin amount of morale and, pride. Number one killer of kings and leaders.
The neutrality pact apart and made it perfectly clear to the Riksdag that the authority of the empire and its armies lay with him and him alone. He still aimed to save everything, to renew the offensive against Russia and Sweden's other enemies. There would be peace eventually, but a peace honorable for Sweden. Who shall we now turn to when our leaders lost their hearts? Lives are lost, but at what cost when the grand dream fall apart? Even the hardcore loyalists in the Riksdag wrote heartfelt letters to their sovereign explaining the impossibility of his demands and that the age of conquering and triumphs was over. Sweden had to come to terms with her enemies, even if it meant giving up territory, or there may well come a day when there was no realm for the king to come home to anymore. Stenbock even went to Bender himself to plead with the king in person, but it was useless. Historians agree that up until 1712, Sweden still had a few chances left to save parts of the realm through clever diplomacy. There was an offer by the Prussian king Frederick I for Karl to lead a combined army from Prussia, Sweden, and Saxony against the Russians. But even that offer was refused by Karl, not wanting to be a puppet for others. The Swedish king was deeply disillusioned by decades of broken promises and betrayals by the other great powers. Instead, he clung to a belief in his personal destiny and a God-given mission that was his from birth. However, in an age of ruthless Staatsräson, putting the security of the state, whatever the form of government, first, by any means necessary, that was a tragedy in itself. In 1713, Magnus Stenbock and 11,000 men were forced to capitulate to an overwhelming force of a Russian, Danish, Saxon coalition. Sweden had now lost all influence in the courts of Europe. A fatalistic mood swept over the Riksdag as the continental positions were basically lost. And at this point, even they were pretty much ready to revolt against Karl and the absolutist constitution if it meant saving Sweden from disaster. Liberal statesmen like Arvid Horn stepped in, pleading for a parliamentary future instead of facing the dangers of a revolution. But this liberal future could only begin after Karl was no more. In the face of this possible revolt, Karl finally came home to Sweden. Despite the burdens he had put on his people, the common folk still praised their beloved king in the hope that now everything would finally turn out for the better. However, the king had no intentions of remaining in Sweden. Instead, he immediately ordered an army of 20,000 men raised, prepared to continue to make war. Talks of peace or neutrality must cease at once. He would take the fight to the enemy, which was by now a coalition of Denmark, Russia, Prussia, Poland, Saxony, and Hanover, because why not Hanover too? With his typical confidence, unshakable belief in God, a little money from the French, Karl set out to save Sweden by a demonstration of power, but one that it could hardly afford. Great triumphs were not easily to be found, and instead there were just more years of fruitless campaigning. In late 1718, Karl and his troops marched towards Danish strongholds in southern Norway. It was already past October, and his troops suffered from the harsh weather and the hardships of the journey. Hundreds were dying of disease as the siege of the fortress at Fredriksten, Fredriksten began. The king himself did not shy away from danger, though, and shared the burden of his troops. He slept in the field with them, kept watch in the trenches, and even led his troops into the breach of the outer walls. By November 30th, the Swedish trenches had been dug up to the final bastion of the fortress. Just a musket shot away, the king and his officers inspected the battlefield by night. Danish defenders constantly lit up the night, trying to pick off sappers. Again and again, Karl was seen climbing the trenches to look over the edge for any sign of activity inside the bastion, to the dismay of his concerned officers. Musket balls and cannonballs have little respect for a king, one of them said, as the king once more put his head over the top.
Yeah, man, bullets, they don't care if you're the highest of royalty or the lowest, like, bucket washers or poppers, whatever you just said. Like, a bullet don't care. Bullets don't discriminate. Whoever is in front of that bullet is going down, or if it's going to cause some kind of inflict damage. Doesn't really matter who it is. Whoever is in front of its path is going down.
Suddenly, a thud was heard as if a stone were hitting the earth. The king's head sunk down on his chest. "Lord Jesus, the king is shot," the officers cried out from the trenches. A piece of metal had pierced Karl's left temple, punching through his head and coming out the other side. The king was dead in an instant at 36 years of age, and his reign of 21 years came to an end. And with the king's death, so too did the constant wars finally come to an end. The king's body was brought back to Sweden, to a nation that had suffered dearly under the costs of war. With his death, the dreams of the great Swedish Empire vanished. Peace finally returned to the Swedish people. Who or what exactly had killed the king that day is still a mystery. Some suspected a canister shot from the fortress walls. Others presumed a musket shot. Some said he was shot on purpose by one of his own by mistake or treachery. There was an investigation, and several liberal politicians were even tried and executed, but hard evidence for an assassination has never been discovered. To this day, over 300 years later, the mystery remains. The mummified body of Karl XII has been exhumed and analyzed.
Holy crap, look at that. Look at the size of that. Whoa. This is him? Holy crap, let me take off this notification. Wow. There he is, guys. Carolus Rex. Good God, look at that. That's the exit wound, if you can tell, because it's kind of like coming like that, so that means that's where it came out from. But then look at the damage it did around the hole too. As it exited, it fractured the... Man, that's a huge hole. Wow, there he is. I've been seeing all these pictures of him and paintings. There he is. Man, that's crazy. Man, he looks good. For being, what they say, he was mummified. I guess they, wow, that's just, all right. Wow, I'm just taken back.
3 times since his death, third in 1917, but there is no answer to the question of who or what killed the king. Okay, now this is going back a lot further than most Sabaton songs, right?
Yes, we're talking about the Swedish Empire in those days. And this song is quite different in that sense that it was actually the one that inspired us to do the album. In Swedish, actually.
So this is the first one that you...
Yeah, I mean, when starting to write the music, I remember it so clearly. I had this idea of this painting, the Funeral March, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, I know the painting. No, funny thing, when I first moved to Sweden and you could take Swedish classes through the government, like the first or second day of it, they started telling us a little Swedish history. We learned about this painting literally the first or second day there in school. So that's what inspired you for this song.
Yes, I had that picture in mind, in my mind when I was writing the main riff, and that sort of became the main chorus of the song. And for some, natural reasons, the words that came out of my head were Swedish. So I sang the chorus in Swedish on the pre-production, and then we listened to it, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's awesome. Let's do the whole album in Swedish. And that seemed like a great idea.
It was a great idea.
Yeah, until you had realized you had to write the lyrics twice and you have to record with all the choirs and everything in time planned for only doing it in one language.
Right, because you were not quite as big then as you are now.
No, and let's just say there was tumultuous times regarding everything from the recording to, we switched band members, quite a few at that time as well, so I don't remember that recording very fondly, and that's usually a good sign.
But it turned out to be great, because it is cool that you did the whole album you did in both languages.
Yes.
It turned out. Now, question though, when, as you said, this was the first song, you know, and you were inspired by the painting and write this. Was it already planned to do a whole album about Swedish history, or was it just, you know?
No, we actually had the plan. Let's do something about the Swedish Empire in those 100 years. And I just had to start somewhere, and that painting came into my mind, and that's the way it went, I guess.
Yeah, did you learn a lot of this in school when you were a kid? I mean, did they teach a lot of Swedish history to young Swedes, or did they when you were younger?
Obviously, this is a big part of the Swedish, education system of, in history. Every nation has its own history, and that's one of the things I love about traveling and touring, because, things that are so, obvious to all Swedes are unheard of in, let's say, Brazil, and vice versa. So.
Yeah, because then think of the things you do, right? Smoking snakes, last dying breath, Panzerkampf. I mean, these all mean a lot different.
Oh yeah, and it's sometimes thanks to some of you guys, fans, who have been giving us books and sending us emails. A good, I'd say, probably 30, 40, 50% of some albums, especially Coat of Arms and Heroes, were inspired by you guys. So
that's really cool. So keep sending them in. All right, well, that is it for Long Live the King, but we will see you next time on Sabaton History.
And that's it for today. All right, everyone. As we said earlier, that's it for today. And we'd like you all to become patrons, but obviously, some of you don't want to. Some of you can't afford it, which is okay too. But you know what? We'd like it if you could help us out anyway, and that is through the magic of sharing this on other social media. Click subscribe, click on the notification, and spam everyone you know about this, because that also helps too. And if you can afford or don't want to become a Patreon, that's okay too. But we'd like you to help us keep this show running, because this is something we've been dreaming about doing for years. Until next time, click there. Time Goes in World War II. Check them out. See you soon.
Pride, and hunger for expansion. I guess you could see how, it always starts, these leaders, these historical figures that end up getting shot by their own men, supposedly, they start off with good intentions, but then somewhere down the line, man, they refuse to take no for an answer. They want to just, he could have stayed back. He was being surrounded by all the old enemies that he had defeated before, like Denmark and like everybody else that they said, the Danish people, it was Denmark, but he could have just fell back, repositioned himself, regained his foothold, but he still wanted to just fight wars. He even said that the leader of Prussia asked him to lead a group of Prussians, Saxons, I think someone else against the Russians. And he said no to that. I don't know. That's frustrating. He brought it upon himself, He really did. Nothing makes me mad more than just when people they reach for too much. You see it a lot in history too. It happens fairly often. You would think that they learned, but I guess not. Well, I think Napoleon happened after this. Napoleon Bonaparte. If you guys don't know, that happened definitely after Carolus Rex and this whole Sweden thing. But that's the history behind it. Now we know that Sweden was in shambles and people were not happy, and yet during the midst of all that, they had to sell the church bells, man. Come on. Open your eyes. And instead he wanted to keep fighting wars, not accept peace treaties here and there. And I guess I was going to say too, they don't really know for sure if it was an accident or on purpose that he was possibly shot from one of his men. Because I was going to say that too. It could have been on accident if he kept popping his head up and the soldier behind him was shooting and he popped his head up. Bam. So, let me know what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoyed the reaction. I certainly enjoyed the video. And we still have just the 2 more songs after this. I think it's something, ruined something, and then there's another one too. Something about battle or war. Man, I didn't look at the titles, but hope to see you guys there, and yeah, see you guys in the next one.